Hello and welcome to the part 2 of building the GUI with tkinter. In this part, we're going to add some labels, some entry widgets, and a couple of buttons to the application window. I have pre-staged the code that I'm going to use to create the labels, the entry widgets, and the buttons, and I'm going to add them a chunk at a time and then explain it. I feel it would be a lot easier to do it this way than try to write the code and explain at the same time. So I'm just going to, under this here, I'm going to tab down just to create some space, and then I will add the first label and the first entry widget code. I have added a couple of lines of code here, line number 10 and 11. I'm just going to run through those code with you. Line number 10, I've created a variable and I called it ft_lbl. We set it to equals to label because I imported the label widget on line number 1. So, and inside this label widget, you need to specify some parameters. The first parameter has to be the window, which is where you want to place the actual label, and the window was defined on line number 3. Next, you want to have a text displayed on the label, and you do that using this text variable, and you set the text. So the label is going to display feet. I've given the label a background color. You set that using the BG property, and I've set it to purple, and you set the foreground color using the FG or foreground property. I set it to white. I've given the label a width of 14. Now, to position the label inside the application container, I need to use the grid function. So inside this, I'm calling the grid function on the variable I created on line number 10. So I'm positioning this label variable on column number 0 and row number 0, and I'm adding some space horizontally. Pad X means add some space horizontally. Pad Y means add some space vertically. All right, the grid basically works like a table, so it positions based on rows and columns. So let's save that and let's take a look and see what it looks like. So this is what the label we've just added looks like. Notice there's some space here horizontally, which I created using this pad X, and you can see here there's a space between the window and the label, which was created using the pad Y. Pad Y means create space vertically. Pad X means create space horizontally. All right, and we've positioned it on column 0 and row 0. The very first row is usually row 0. Next thing we're going to do is position an entry widget on the same row so it matches this feet label. I have added some more code from line number 13 to line 16. I'm just going to run through the code. Line 13, I've defined a variable called ft_value, and I've set it to equals to double var. Basically what I'm saying is the data type that I expect to go into this variable called ft_value is going to be a double variable. Double basically is a type of tkinter data type, which includes a floating point number. So it allows you to enter values that are both whole numbers and decimals. Okay. Line 14 created another variable called ft_entry. Has set it to equals to this entry widget. If we take a look, line number 1, I imported the double var. I also imported the entry widget from tkinter, hence I'm able to use them here. All right, so inside this entry widget, we have to pass in some values. The very first parameter has to be the window, because that is where we want to create the entry widget. That's where we want to place it. And then we want this text variable basically is used to determine what type of data to expect in that widget. And usually you set it to equals to the variable you've set on line number 13. All right. And then I give the entry widget a width of 14. Line number 15, I am using the grid method to position the entry widget inside the application window. I'm positioning it on column number 1 and row number 0 so that it is on the same row as the label I created on line number 10. Line number 16, I'm using this delete function here to clear the entry widget so that there is no value when the application launches. Okay, so it's going to delete anything from 0 to the end the very first time the application launched so that the entry widget is clear. So once you've done that, just click File and Save, and let's take a look. So you can see this is the entry widget I've just created on the same row as the label, and you can see the entry widget is empty because of line number 16, and line number 16 clears anything that is there so that it is blank before you accept any inputs. I have added a chunk of code from line 21 to 27 to create another label and another entry widget. The process was the same as the previous label and entry widget. All I've done here is changed the name of the variables, and on the entry widget for this one here on line 26, I set a pad property on Y so that it creates some space vertically underneath that entry widget. All right. But apart from that, the other process are the same, so I'm not going to elaborate on the description because I've already done that in the previous label and entry widget. So just going to save, and then we can take a look at how it looks. So you can see this is how it looks. That's the second label, and that's the second entry widget. Next, I'm going to add two buttons. One would be a button that will do the conversion, and the other would be a clear button. I've added a couple of lines of code to create a button from line 29 to 30. Line 29, I created a variable called convert_btn. I set it to equals to button. This button widget we imported on line number 1 from tkinter, so I'm able to use it here. And the very first parameter you pass into this widget has to be the window, which is where we want the button to be created. We use the text variable to give the button a name. So the button is going to have a name called convert. We set the background color to blue, the foreground color to white. We give it a width of 14. And then this command property, at the moment I've set it to blank using this placeholder blank. This here is going to be the function call. So when I've created a function for this button, I'm going to include the name of the function here. So anytime someone clicks on this button, this command property here will call the function that is responsible for controlling that button. That has not been created, hence I'm placing a blank value there at the moment. But when I do, I will replace the blank value with the name of the function. Line number 30, I'm using the grid method on the variable I created on line 29 to position the button inside the application window. So I'm positioning the button on column 0 and on row number 3, and I'm creating some space horizontally using the pad X properties. So I'm just going to click File, Save, and let's take a look at the button. So this is what the button looks like at the moment. This button we just created called Convert. All right, position on row number 3. So I'm going to create another button, same process. So I'm not going to elaborate on the description once I've added the code. I have added a couple of lines of code here, line 32 and 33, to create another button. The process was the same as the previous button. The only thing I've changed here is the positioning of the button inside the application window using the grid method. So this is going to be positioned on column number 1. All right, and I've changed the name of the variables as well. Also has a different background color. So let me save that, and then we can take a look at the finished product. So this is the GUI now completed for the application. We've got our 2 labels, 2 entry widgets, and we've got our 2 buttons. In the next video, we're going to start creating the functions that will control these 2 buttons and make the application work. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us on this programming journey. If you found this video insightful and engaging, please consider giving it a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button below. By subscribing, you'll stay updated with our latest programming courses, coding tutorials, and tech discussions. Learning and growing together is what makes our community thrive. So, don't forget to ring the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. Your support fuels our passion for sharing knowledge and empowering aspiring developers like you. If you enjoyed this course, please share it with your friends and fellow programmers. Let's spread the love of coding and create a community of learners who inspire and uplift one another.